I'm so glad to be joined by you, Michael, not one of the Mikes, the CEO of AmeriCorps, the federal agency for service and volunteering. You are currently celebrating your 30th anniversary. So, Michael, happy 30th birthday.
Well, thank you so much. Don't you think I look great for 30?
Yeah, you look great. I won't ask your actual age since the focus here is on the organization.
A little bit more than 30.
Just a little bit. Just a day or two over 30. Let's set the table here at the beginning. I think people may have heard of AmeriCorps through the years, but for those who are not familiar, give us a sense, what is AmeriCorps in the year 2024?
So AmeriCorps is the federal agency for service and volunteering. Our mission is how do we improve lives, strengthen communities, and foster civic engagement through service and volunteering. The premise 30 years ago was actually a campaign idea from Bill Clinton. He was inspired by his own life of service. He was seeing some of these new organizations like City Year popping up and Public Allies, where young people were willing not to just volunteer once a week or from time to time, but they are actually willing, like the military, to give a year of their lives, 2 years of their lives in service to their country, in schools, in food banks. And so the president and members of Congress at that time thought, this is a great government investment because we're never going to have enough money to pay all of the people to do all of the things that communities need. But we could tap into this unique American spirit to want to help our neighbors, to want to give back in a long, sustained way. And that's what AmeriCorps is all about. So today, we have about 200,000 AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps senior volunteers that are serving in 40,000 locations across the country. And chances are, if there is a challenge in a community and there are people of goodwill doing something about it, AmeriCorps is at the heart of it.
So, and I think some people might be familiar with the Peace Corps. So the Peace Corps is abroad, AmeriCorps here domestic.
That is great. That's a great way of looking at it. And Peace Corps is I like to call them our big sister. Peace Corps was obviously founded by President Kennedy in 1963. And so we came along about 30 years later. So we learn a lot from Peace Corps, and we give an opportunity for people to serve right here in their own communities.
So you've been running the organization for a couple years now?
Almost 3. Yeah.
Talk to me about your personal experience, Michael, with volunteering. Did you, as a kid, as an adult, is there a particular experience as a volunteer that impacted you, that taught you something?
Well, the reason why I love this job so much is I think I can honestly say that service saved my life and was a bridge for my family. My parents were both teenagers when I was born. They were 16 years old. I grew up with a single mom. We didn't have a whole lot of money. We grew up in a neighborhood that in the 1980s went from kind of a blue-collar community to a community that was dealing with the crack epidemic, that was dealing with, a rise in violence and kind of the change in the economics of that time. And what my mother did, some brilliant teenager that was smarter than I think I still am, I don't know what she had at 16, was she sent me to my local Boys and Girls Club. She tells me now that she sent me to my Boys and Girls Club because she needed cheap daycare, and that was her first option. And it was at the Boys and Girls Club that I met foster grandparents, which are now a part of our AmeriCorps seniors, where I met Vista members, which are now AmeriCorps Vista members, where I met youth development professionals who weren't looking to get rich, weren't looking to get famous, but really believed in this idea that our neighbors' children are all of our children. And so they watered into me, they gave to me, they nurtured me, and they allowed me to dream dreams bigger than I could ever imagine. And from a very young age, they said, you're going to serve. I didn't sign up to be a volunteer, but they said, you know what, this week we're going to the food pantry. You know what, this next weekend, you're going to come help us pack boxes for the Senior Share program. We're going to raise money for this local cause. And from a very young age, they taught me that no matter how little I had something to give back. And so from a very early age, I looked up to these folks. I wanted to be like them, and I wanted to build a career that was helping them. And so the work is very personal for me, and I get to work with folks like that every single day.
You said it saved your life. What would have been the alternative if you feel like you didn't have that opportunity, if you didn't have those people who were investing in you?
Sadly, you look at statistics for a little black boy that's growing up in communities like the one that I grew up in. Before I did this job, I ran President Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative. And one of the statistics that always broke my heart is black boys, for instance, are 6% of the nation's population, but 52% of the nation's homicide victims. You look at by the age of 25, I believe about 50% of black men will have been arrested. And so the statistics for growing up poor and black and male in the United States of America does not always create a great recipe. But thankfully, even though I grew up in a community that didn't have a whole lot of money, we had this belief that we were going to be there for each other, that we were going to take care of each other. I had neighbors, I had volunteers, I had Boys and Girls Club folks that were there for us and wrapped their arms around me and my peers in my community.
I want to talk a bit about the state of volunteerism, volunteering in America. Some of the most recent stats, maybe you have updated stats that I saw coming out of COVID, is that less than a quarter of Americans formally volunteered with an organization. When those stats came out just out of COVID, which I imagine quarantine, et cetera, impacted, it was the lowest percentage of volunteering we have seen in this country going back 20 years since you began tracking stats. Is that of concern? Has that improved in the last year or two since sort of post-COVID, you can say? How concerned are you guys at AmeriCorps and frankly, the entire government about the state of volunteering in America?
It's certainly of concern. So every 2 years, we release the Volunteering and Civic Life in America study in partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau. And as you said, since we've been tracking it, we do two different studies. One, we look at the number of Americans that volunteer formally with a nonprofit organization on a regular basis. And we also look at the folks that are kind of doing the neighbor helping neighbor, more informal volunteering. And so during the pandemic period, we saw a 7 percentage point drop in the number of Americans that volunteered regular with a nonprofit. We've never seen a drop. It always stays stagnant at about a third of the population. So 7% point drop was really concerning because the demand for nonprofit services was going up and up and up. We saw during the pandemic long lines at food banks, the need for learning pods for the kids of first responders and essential workers. And so services were going up, but the volunteers that you needed just weren't there. Now, some of that is not completely surprising. Schools closed. A lot of people serve in their kids' schools. A lot of seniors, for instance, were told, please don't come, even if we had volunteers, because we're worried about your health and safety. And so some people were turned away. Some people couldn't serve. But I think it was still worth taking a look at what was happening. Now, the bright side was the number of Americans that were doing the neighbor helping neighbor work, checking in on your elderly neighbor, going to get groceries for them, setting up community learning pods, that sort of thing.
Right. This is not through a formal organization, but just helping your neighbor.
Just people saying, I'm taking care of my community. That actually stayed strong and actually grew in some places over the course of the pandemic. I can't tell you where it's going because we are still parsing the data. We just got in the data dump about a month ago from the U.S. Census Bureau, and we will release the new numbers coming out in November. But I would like to say I am optimistic that we will see a turn in the right direction as Americans are coming back to serve. And we've recently had some meetings with various nonprofits that we work with, and we're starting to see volunteering picking up at organizations across the country.
So you're hearing anecdotally from organizations that
I'm hearing anecdotally, even for AmeriCorps. At the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a spike in people that wanted to serve. There's something amazing about Americans that when disaster hits, they want to figure out how to do something. But then as the pandemic settled in, as the economy got really hot and the job market was great, we saw some record declines in recruitment. And in the past 2 years, some changes we made, some things that I think we're doing better. We're up, for instance, 30% over where we were this time last year. So we are beginning to see a return, and I am hopeful that the Volunteering and Civic Life in America study, which will come out in November, will back that up.
Though still, even you talked about, pre-pandemic levels, a third, that still means that 2/3 of Americans are not volunteering.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, and there's some work that can be done on this. It is a third of Americans that are putting their names on the books of a nonprofit organizations saying, I'm going to be there 5 hours a week or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I think that's worthy of celebration and applause. I think about my own community, my uncle who got all the kids in the neighborhood and our cousins and, took them to soccer practice or took them to Six Flags, probably didn't consider himself a volunteer. My grandmother, who always opened her door on every Sunday to all the neighborhood kids to eat Sunday dinner, probably didn't consider herself a volunteer. So I think there is something wonderful about the people that are doing formal volunteering with a nonprofit, and we need more of that. But I still believe that there is a remarkable spirit of service in this nation that might not be counted in some of the ways that we're counting.
I know that AmeriCorps has programs for all ages. And one thing that's been, notable in recent years is they've talked about the loneliness epidemic, especially among older Americans. And we have a record number of boomers who've retired, a very large population. They're living longer. Talk to me about programming that's focused around that population. And they're often looking to, they're looking for fulfillment, beyond what they did professionally, especially as, thankfully, due to modern medicine, et cetera, that they are living longer.
Moshe, we're not supposed to have favorites. AmeriCorps serves everybody. Everyone serves from 18 to 80 and beyond. We have programs that are doing disaster response. We have programs like Vista that are doing capacity programs to build capacity in organizations that are working on poverty alleviation. We've got our public allies and our city years and our playworks and all those sorts of people. But I have fallen in love with our seniors in a way that I didn't even know was possible. So AmeriCorps seniors are 3 different programs. We've got foster grandparents that are low-income seniors who are serving in early childhood settings, pre-K, first grade, second grade. They are doing one-on-one supports with students in some of our schools that are in some of the toughest neighborhoods across the country. They are supporting our teachers. They are there day in and day out. We have our AmeriCorps Senior Companion programs, which is seniors helping seniors. Even during the pandemic, they couldn't show up in person, but they were doing porch visits. They were calling people on their birthday. They were just checking in and saying, I'm here for you. What do you need? And then we have our RSVP program, which is not a stipended program, but anybody over 55 can come in, and they're doing everything from Meals on Wheels to tax preparation for low-income folks during the tax season. And what I love about these folks is they serve on average 7 years. The number of times where I've met 90-year-olds who had been serving for 20 years, I can't even count anymore. And they are very clear about not only this impact that they're having in the community, but the impact that it has on their lives. And we have the data that backs it up. It increases physical health. It increases mental health. It increases social cohesion, decreases social isolation. And so this idea that volunteering is selfless is true, but in many ways there's a selfish component about it. And I love that we can see that in our senior programming.
Yeah, I saw a study from Carnegie Mellon recently that fewer hospitalizations, higher self-esteem, greater life satisfaction, greater ability to manage your own chronic illness if you volunteer.
Absolutely. And I meet with seniors all the time, and I say, why aren't you at home in a rocking chair? Why aren't you golfing? And, people will say to me, I did that for a week and I was bored. I couldn't do it anymore. Or I had skills to give. I had taught my whole life and I felt like I had something to give back. I worked in accounting. I could do some free taxes, and I still have a lot to give. Seniors are younger. I have to tell you, Moshe, the older I get, 55, where you start, seems really young. And so there are ways that we have people sometimes are career shifters. We have a senior workforce program where people are coming in, maybe I was a legal secretary. I'm now 55 years old. I don't want to be a legal secretary for the next 10 to 15 years. So I'll come in one of your education programs and change my career path through service. So we're excited to see how we're creating those paths for our seniors.
And how much flexibility are we talking about? Are we talking about, everything from 40 hours a week to 1 hour a month? I mean, is it basically a full spectrum of options?
Yeah, so the difference between AmeriCorps and kind of episodic volunteering is that it is ongoing. It is a commitment, usually at least a year. You don't see people usually doing much less than 20. We want to be a real service to
Meaning
communities.
less than 20 hours a week.
Less than 20 hours a week.
Okay.
every now and again, but most of them are at least kind of looks more like a part-time job. And a lot of our AmeriCorps members are at 1,700 hours a year, which is about 40 hours a week, especially in school settings. And so it is that sustained service where you are part of the community that really matters. Our RSVP program, our Retired Senior Volunteer Program, probably offers the most flexibility. And that's where we get a lot of our veterans that are serving. That's where we get folks that say, I'm just going to do this during tax time. And then you won't see me again until tax time. And so that's where we have a little bit more flexibility.
Let's talk young people here, because we talked about the loneliness epidemic among old people, but
yes.
I mean, there's some stark
numbers. Did you
numbers.
say old people? No one's old, most. They're just they're
right.
they're seasoned citizens.
My mom listens to this podcast. I apologize, Mom, and I was not referring to her. Seasoned. I like that word. But I will ask about younger folks because there is some stark data coming out about their mental health and the state of our young people and Gen Zers these days. Talk to me about the programs available coming out of high school, what's called a gap year. Are there particular types of young people that are better for AmeriCorps than others? What do you have in store there? Because I know one of the things you're focused on too is also using that volunteer year, that gap year, to help them pick a professional career, or at least direction, start to transition to a professional career.
There was a debate at the beginning of AmeriCorps that said, what is this for? Is this for community impact, or is this for member impact? Is this a leadership program, or is this a community development program? And when I came in, I said, let's stop having that argument. It has to be both. We now have 1.3 million AmeriCorps alums. 75% of them stay in the social sector. There are several members of the United States Congress. There are people that are in the White House. There are people in Hollywood and corporations. You can't go to a Habitat for Humanity or a United Way or a Boys and Girls Club without meeting an executive director who is an AmeriCorps alum. And so there is something extraordinary about the skills, the credentialing, the curriculum that you get while you are serving that helps you to accelerate in your career path. You also hear people saying it's where I found myself. It's where I got a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of identity. And so there is something wonderful about service that really helps to shape leaders at all levels of American society. When it comes to the youth mental health crisis, which the Surgeon General talks about, it is shocking when you look at suicide rates, when you look at young people who feel a constant state of despair. You think about the great idea of social media that was supposed to bring people together, and now we are the most connected society where people feel the most disconnected. And so one of the things AmeriCorps has always done, we've had a Healthy Futures portfolio, and there had been some work in public health and youth mental health. But about a year and a half ago, we were seeing a lot more applications for our Public Health AmeriCorps program, which we run with CDC, that were in the mental health space. And then we were hearing from some of our partners, we want to do more. We heard from Pinterest. We heard from the Schultz Family Foundation, who said, we want to do something in this space. So we all got together and we launched the Youth Mental Health Corps. We launched it in May, I believe. Youth Mental Health Corps is going to do a couple different things. We're starting in 7 states. We'll have a pilot program in the first year that will touch 500 young people that are going to be working in schools. They're going to be peer navigators. They're going to be helping folks to provide access to the information and resources that are out there. They're going to be helping to identify their peers that might be struggling. And so we're going to have these AmeriCorps members, but then they're also going to be getting training on the various jobs that are out there in the youth mental health space. So when they are thinking about leaving high school, what are the college courses they might want to take? What are the careers that are out there so we can build approximate workforce of folks that are thinking about youth mental health? So we'll start with 500. That will grow. We'll learn lots of lessons. And we believe that through national and community service, we can begin to make more of a dent on the youth mental health crisis that our children and families are facing.
And what is the typical commitment a young person makes out of high school? Is it typically a year and then they, take that 1 year, or do you see what's the average time that a young person spends? And then typically what's their route? Are they immediately going to college or are they, doing something different next?
Yeah, most of the AmeriCorps members we're getting are that year after high school or that year after college, and so in the year after college, that's when you'll see someone saying, I was studying education, so I think I want to be a city year member, a city year AmeriCorps member, which they're doing tutoring, mentoring, absenteeism, behavior curriculum in school settings, and they'll do that for a year, and they might say, I want to do that for another year. I want to learn a little bit more. I want to be a more senior leader, or you might hear, I was doing city year in Washington, D.C., but I heard about this Reading Partners AmeriCorps program in Utah. So I'm going to go do my second year there. So that's what you typically see. You see people doing 1 to 2 years. Every now and again, you see people doing up to our maximum, which is 4 years. But it is usually, if it's high school, it's usually that gap year until I get myself back into college or some sort of other post-secondary education. And then after college, you see that 1 to 2 years, maybe growing to 4. And then what I tell AmeriCorps members, one of the things I hear from AmeriCorps members as I'm on the road is, why do we have to have a 4-year limit? We should be able to do this for as long as we want. And I'll say, what's your mom and dad say about that? They probably say they want you to get a job, don't they? Mm-hmm. I want you to get a job. I want you to take this experience and I want you to grow this into something where you are beginning to give back to your community in a different way.
Do you have to be of a certain means, though, to be able to do this? Is there a way, depending on what your financial, some people might say, Michael, I'd love to volunteer. I got to work. I got to make ends meet here. Yeah.
So AmeriCorps members get a living allowance so that you can keep a roof over your head and food in your belly when you serve. Some AmeriCorps programs actually provide housing. I was just with our AmeriCorps Cape Cod program, which has been around for 30 years, and they provide housing on Cape Cod for the environmental work that they're doing. I was in a program in Miami, a college that provides on-campus housing, and that happens in different places. AmeriCorps members also get an education award that's named after the first CEO of the agency, Eli Siegel, and that is set to grow with Pell Grants. So right now it's almost $8,000 a year per year of service that folks get to pay for college. They get student loan forbearance, and then there's oftentimes other wraparound benefits. So for instance, in my hometown of Springfield, Massachusetts, Springfield College has a master's in social work program that coincides with an AmeriCorps program where you're serving in the schools. So lots of wraparound benefits. And what we find is you're not going to make a salary that you're going to make in the private sector or in the public sector. It is a living allowance. It's going to be enough to make sure that you can
this ain't
get
Wall
by.
Street.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's going to be enough so you can get by. And I am proud during the Biden administration on our watch, we have raised that living allowance from the minimum of $6 an hour when I came in, almost $7, and now it'll be $12 this year at a minimum. Our local grantees can raise money to make it even higher. And President Biden has called on Congress to get us to at least a minimum of $15 an hour. So we are making it so no matter where you're coming from, service is not a luxury for the few, but an opportunity for the many.
I was struck by a map I saw recently. USA Facts and a nonpartisan group put it together based on Census Bureau information about which states had the highest rates of formal volunteering. And wondering if you've dived into this. So I was looking at the data, and you have Utah, Wyoming, Minnesota, Maine sort of at the top in terms of the most number of people volunteering. So both red states and blue states there.
Yes.
And then you have, maybe I'm not that surprised, Florida and Nevada at the bottom. Are there states that are doing good work to get people? Is it a cultural thing? Explain sort of
You're
the phenomenon.
You're going to get me into trouble with this. There's no great way to answer this question. We used to do a lot of competition amongst the states.
Yeah.
And to figure out 1 year, I think, there was something like the losing governor had to do something for another governor. There are ingredients, right, that take place. There are some states that have more mandates in high schools, for instance. Colleges, we have a Schools of National Service program. Some schools that are more service-minded than others. I think, in Utah, that has been on the top of that list, I think, since we've done it. You can't mistake the Mormon Church and how service is such a core part of what they do. It's part and parcel to what is important to that community.
Giving back is part of the religion.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can begin to look at some of those things that are important. Also, one of the things that we have to look at is sometimes volunteering formally is a privilege. If I'm a single mom, I've got 4 kids at home, I'm probably serving my community, right? I'm probably at my kid's school. I am probably, taking my sister's kids from time to time. I'm doing other things. But I can't serve 20 hours a week. I'm just trying to keep my family together. So sometimes you have to look at some of those conditions as well.
You talked about youth anxiety and a number of issues. One of them is also the climate.
Yes.
The state of our world. Americans, of all ages, are worried about the climate. I know that's been an aspect of what you guys have been working on in AmeriCorps. How are people serving when it comes to dealing with environmental and climate issues right now?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, 30 years ago, it was so many of the state conservation corps that were the loudest advocate for the creation of AmeriCorps because they knew that they needed a steady stream of funding and they needed a network to help grow this space. So this whole conservation and sustainability aspect of saving our people and our planet has been a part of AmeriCorps' DNA from the very beginning. Last year alone, we moved about $160 million to our environmental stewardship portfolio. So that's something that's been a part of us. During the start of the Biden administration, we were getting a lot of push from young people saying we need a new CCC. President Roosevelt had the CCC, which was about getting thousands of boys, happened to be white boys at that time, in the woods to help build our parks and build trails and that sorts of thing. And it was remarkable, and we still see some of that infrastructure in place from those programs during the Roosevelt administration. And so they said we need a new era of this, one that is rooted in environmental justice, one that is rooted in equity, and also one that is rooted in determining climate anxiety into climate action, and turning climate action into something that might give you an opportunity to have a stake in the green jobs of the future. And so, we thought we would get some money from Congress to do this. There was this Build Back Better Act that would have moved $15 billion to our agency to create a once-in-a-generation climate movement, but that bill didn't go through. And so President Biden said, Michael, I still want you to do something about it. Cabinet, I still want you to do something about it. So AmeriCorps is now leading 7 federal agencies and a movement within the first year to bring 20,000 American Climate Corps members to communities to work on urgent climate needs now. It will be everything from the traditional trail work that's happening out there to solar energy, to climate education, to urban gardening, urban farming, all of the various issues that are happening with climate. And then we're partnering, for instance, with NABTU, with building trades organizations to provide training for these American Climate Corps members so that they'll stay in the building trades. There's similar curriculum around energy, similar curriculum around solar, similar curriculum with the parks, the U.S. Forest Service. We launched Forest Corps as a part of American Climate Corps, where folks are doing fire mitigation, and we hope they'll stay in the Forest Service. And so that's what we're doing. We're providing them an opportunity right now to work on urgent climate issues and making sure that they get the training and the credentialing that they need so that they'll stay in green jobs.
This all comes against the backdrop. There's a presidential election, I'm sure you've heard, happening in this country. But it comes at a time where we're so divided, right? You see new survey data, especially among young people, like unwilling to live in a dorm room with somebody who has different political views. People starting to move away. You see less purple areas in this country and more just stark blue and deep red. Volunteering, is that the last bastion, like for people of all political persuasions to get together? How do you see this division? Is it playing out? Is it impacting AmeriCorps?
Volunteering may be the first and the last. There was another study, too, that showed about 70% of Americans believe that polarization hadn't gotten so bad that we can't solve big problems as a country anymore. And we certainly see this showing up on issues that Americans used to all be able to come together around. And now you can't talk about it at the dinner table. And so anyone that has been around the national service space for any amount of time sees that there is something about serving after a hurricane, after a fire, after a flood. If you are mucking and gutting a house, if you are helping someone rebuild, you don't care what color hat somebody is wearing. You don't care what their political ideology is. And it helps you to see the humanity of your neighbor. And one of the reasons I love my job so much is I really do believe that I get to see America at its best. You see people coming together in all sorts of ways in all different types of communities, rural, urban, tribal, just wanting to make sure that they're taking care of their neighbors. And we actually have some data that backs it up. So, for instance, we've learned that about 80% of AmeriCorps alums said they are more comfortable working with people of different backgrounds after their AmeriCorps service. We have a new piece of data that says something like 72% of our AmeriCorps alum actually changed a deeply held belief after their AmeriCorps service because of what they learned. And so AmeriCorps, national service, community service, is one of these beautiful, unique third spaces that creates an opportunity for people to come together, get to know each other. I think there's an initial trust because you are both trying to do something with a similar goal that helps you to grow. One of the stories I heard recently from one of our programs in Montana, that there was the program director said an old crusty rancher is what he said, who needed some help with some of the water systems on his land. And they said, all right, we got AmeriCorps members that we could bring in. He's like, I don't know about these young kids on my land. And of course, what you know, these young kids come, they get to know each other, they really like each other. And when they were finishing the project, the rancher said something along the lines of, well, I don't like the federal government, but I love AmeriCorps. It's like, okay, we won't tell them that it's one and the same.
It's like what you hear from you all the time. I hate Congress, but I like my congressman.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you see these bridges. And so we're actually, we're doubling down on that. We have a research project that's underway so we can get some more of that data. What is it about sustained service that helps to build bridges in ways that other things don't? So we've got some great research that's happening there. We have bridge building training that we're providing all across the country in partnership with Catholic Charities and Service Year Alliance and Interfaith America, where we're training AmeriCorps members on bridge building tactics to bring people together. And we're also funding some pilots that are out there to look at programs that are specifically bringing people together through service.
So, as we deal with the election, as we deal with the divisiveness, as we deal with what feels like endless challenges, no matter where you look, there's a challenge here domestically, abroad. It can feel overwhelming. How do you typically suggest to all of us feeling overwhelmed? By the way, with our personal lives too. Speaking of Surgeon General warnings, recently, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, he said parents are overwhelmed to the point of not functioning. And I understand that as a new father here who have a 1-year-old.
I think parents have all. I love our Surgeon General. That was a really great study.
Yeah.
But I think if I talked to my mother or grandmother, they felt pretty overwhelmed too.
They're like, we didn't have the internet and all these things that you have in cell phones. Like, we just had to assume you were okay till you came home. Past 10 p.m.
Also, my grandmother wasn't taking her annual vacation to Cancun or whatever that many of our friends are doing.
How do you suggest people get started? How can they find? I live in X place I'm X age, looking for some type of programming. What's the best way to go about it?
Well, the great thing about AmeriCorps is we've got something for everybody. If you want to be in the schools, we've got programs in the schools. If you want to never see a person and you want to be out on a trail in Alaska or Montana, we've got that for you too.
For both introverts and extroverts, huh?
We've got it. If you want to be on a van with 10 people you've never met before and be sent to respond to disasters, we've got AmeriCorps NCCC. If you're a senior, my grandmother, she said, I don't want to work with kids, but I'll do that senior companion thing. So we've got something for everybody from 18 to 80 and beyond. If you go to AmeriCorps.gov, we have a tool called Fit Finder. And so you can enter in some data about what your interests are, where you want to be, how long you want to serve, and it will spit out some options for you on what's the best program that's available for you.
Cool. So if you had to put a headline on the state of volunteering in America right now, what would be your headline right now, Michael?
The spirit of service in America is strong, and what we need to do is we need to shine a spotlight on it. We need to remind people that what de Tocqueville saw when he visited America back in the 1800s, this unique spirit of Americans not waiting for the government to do something.
Sorry, just for reference, for those of you unfamiliar, we're talking about a French traveler who came to America and wrote about what made America uniquely unique, Alexis de Tocqueville.
Did I just walk out? I'm sorry. I am in Washington.
Yeah, no, you're making references. I'm like, no. And by the way, I went to school at GW. I spent 10 years in Washington, so I'm familiar. Just want to translate it for the audience, so they're not like, de Tocqueville who?
Right. So that thing that he saw way back then, the barn raisings, the people helping each other, not waiting for government. There are some people that are worried that doesn't still exist, but it exists. It exists in communities all across this country, and Americans are still there. They want to have each other's back. They, during times of crisis, run towards the challenge. And so we need to shine a spotlight on that. We need to lift that up, and we need to show our children that this is the way out, and this is a pathway to strengthen themselves, strengthen our communities, and strengthen our country.
And if I don't have 20 hours a week available, what would you suggest to everyone else who also wants to give back?
So take a look. So, for instance, our AmeriCorps CCC program, we have a Summer of Service program. Our VISTA program has a Summer of Service. But if you really want to go micro, you could come in. You could look. We run the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service. We have the 9/11 Day of Service that's coming up next week that we run. And we can also help you if you go to our website, find more micro opportunities to volunteer with organizations across the country.
Perfect. Michael, thanks for the chat.
Thanks, Moshe.